in some of the earlier bits of writing I did, up until about 18 months ago, or something like that, my concern at that time was to do with a kind of imaginary physics. That was the term I used, imaginary physics. And what I was interested in was consistencies amongst metaphors and within metaphorical schema that we use in language and in thought, and speculating whether these consistencies that we have represent a kind of physics. So, for example, when we use height metaphors to talk about value, and we say that my spirits are up today, or I'm feeling low today, or I'm feeling down in the dumps today, indicating certain states of mind and different values of those states of mind according to height. Whether there's a kind of physics involved in that, whether there's a kind of gravity which explains the rate at which my spirit will plummet or soar according to certain circumstances. And if there is a kind of physics, and again this is speculative of course, if there is a kind of physics, what kind of physics is it? And at that time I was looking at what's sometimes called folk physics or naive physics, which is fairly similar to Newtonian physics in that it tends to give reasonably accurate representations of the behaviour of medium-sized objects. But there are significant differences. There's elements of agency, for example, involved in folk physics. This is something that Pat Hayes writes a lot about, and a few other people. Barry Smith writes about it. So that's what I was looking at, this sort of imaginary physics, which, according to which the sort of rules of our thought, if you like, the rules of mentation, operate. And one of the things I noticed in that is that there are things that are happening in thought which are outside of any kind of folk physics or Newtonian physics or any other kind of physics that I'm aware of, certainly. So, for example, whilst our spirits might soar and our spirits might plummet as we move from one mental state to another, from depression to elation and back again, that movement, and of course whilst that movement may be sort of understandable in terms of terrestrial physics, there are other things happening which have no analogue. And I'm particularly interested in the way things shape-shift. As we all know, metaphors, mixing metaphors in prepared speech is considered a bad thing, it's overt, but we mix metaphors all the time. Every sentence that we speak almost uses a number of different metaphors throughout, and those metaphors change quite dramatically. We could be speaking about a love affair, for example, and begin speaking of it as it was a journey. So we might say that I can't think of a single example, but we might say it's got off the rails if it's not going well, or we might say that it's a bit of a bumpy ride, that kind of thing. But in the same conversation, perhaps even in the same sentence, we might talk about that love affair as if it was a kind of resource or as a kind of nutrient. So we might say, I'm not getting anything out of it. Or we might say that you're full of desire for that person, that kind of thing. So there's a sense in which there's some sort of exchange of a material resource. So that kind of shift, that kind of transmutation in which one concept can turn into another concept, a completely different concept, doesn't have any representative in physics. But of course other aspects of the use of metaphors and schemas does, as I've already indicated with this up-down thing. And there are others, things like repetitions and sort of echoing, quite often there's a kind of echoing that takes place in schema, in which there's some similarity between the metaphors, but they're not the same. Some slight shifting. So what do these things represent? What kind of a physics is that? If it is physics. Physics isn't the right word. Never mind. What I'm sort of imagining right now, how I'm sort of working with that now, is that it's not a physics, it's a poetics, or it's a poetics of imaginary physics, that kind of thing. Because some of the shifts that I see happening are inevitably some of the shifts that one sees in poetry, and of course poetry is in a sense, I think, is the revealing of those things for aesthetic effect. And we do see those effects in prototypical form in many cases, in poetic expression. So metaphors routinely shift and routinely turn from one thing to another. The tropes of poetry. And also we get this repeating, and also things like meter and rhythm effects that we get in poetry. There's no physics of rhythm. There are things which repeat, there are things which are rhythmic, but the rhythms, the metrical forms, if you like, of existence aren't because they're poetic, they're just the side effects of other physical properties. The daily cycle of the sun rotating, of the moon, of the earth rotating, or the yearly cycle of the earth orbiting the sun. These are kind of rhythms, but you understand them as rhythms. The rhythms of a poetic line, the rhyme of a poetic line, the assonance and dissonance that finds in poetic lines, shifting metaphors, metonyms and synonyms within poetic expressions, seems to my mind to supplement those sort of physical analogues that shift metaphors inside the mind. So in addition to there being something like imaginary laws of physics going on inside our cognition, which explains sort of the plummeting of our emotions as we go from the heights of elation to the depths of despair, presumably at the rate of 9.8 feet per sec. Then in addition to those sort of imaginary laws, there's also imaginary poetics in place, which inform our understanding, and which give form to our understanding, not just inform, but give form to, provide a different kind of sense. So we understand rhyme and rhythm and meter.